curse of the tunnel, and I wasn't alone. The first night I noticed the tunnel, the town was nearly asleep, and the lamplight pooled like tired watchmen across the street. My rental smelled of boiled coffee and the kind of dust that remembers every winter. I had come to this quiet place intending to be anonymous, work, sleep, repair the parts of myself I had set down elsewhere. The tunnel was an afterthought while walking home from the train station, a dark mouth beneath a rusted track, bricks damp and black with an age that felt intentional. Locals answered questions about the tunnel as if it were a bad taste they preferred not to speak aloud. Myra, my neighbor, had said simply, "No reason to go there." Her eyes landed on the tracks, then moved away, like a bird avoiding the stream. Rumors embroidered themselves quickly among strangers, lost dogs, strange echoes, a man who had wandered in and never come out. Those stories felt like wallpaper, attractive and thin. I left my curiosity tucked behind politeness and went back to unpacking, the tunnel persistent at the edge of thought. On the second week, I woke to scratching at the windows and a whisper that could have been the wind. I told myself it was the house settling, the edges of old wood remembering cold. When I walked the lane that afternoon, there was a folded scrap caught in the iron of the rail, a small, unevenly inked note that said, "You hear it too." No signature. My palms felt oddly cold holding that paper. Alone or not, the knowledge that someone else had touched this place rearranged the geometry of my evenings. Footprints appeared on the muddy path by the tunnel, smaller than mine but recent, and a torn yellow ticket lay half buried in leaves, edges ragged by rain. I pocketed the ticket like a confession. It wasn't violent, no blood or force, but the presence of something left behind felt more intimate than any threat. At night, the house felt watched. The ordinary clink of dishes sounded distant. A shadow moved in a rhythm that did not match my sleep. Paranoia was a slow animal here, soft-pawed and patient. Myra finally spoke with a caution that was almost tenderness. Over coffee, she told me the town had long since decided some things were better left alone. She didn't say curse aloud, but the way her hand tightened around the cup carried the word. She mentioned other names, people who had vanished from small lives, their departures shrugged into explanations, like moving away or illness. I left with more questions than I had walked in with, carrying the map folded in my pocket like a small, conspiratorial thing. The next night I went prepared, lantern low, and an old map flattened on my knees, the tape recorder hidden in my jacket. Walking toward the tunnel made the air colder, as if the brick itself inhaled. Inside, the tunnel breathed echoes that did not match my steps. Somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern, a soft scraping answered me, patient and deliberate. I told myself to be rational. Stone makes music. Animals make noises. But rationality felt thin against the way my throat tightened, and my hands remembered names from a past I couldn't summon. The walls bore marks, small, hurried carvings and letters that had been traced and retraced until the stone blurred. A line of names ran along the mortar, some complete, some only initials. One of them matched the surname of a man I'd seen at the diner who always ate alone. Another name I recognized from an old notice board. In the dim light, The letters seemed to shift, as if insisting on new readings. A scrape behind me halted my breath. When I turned, there was nothing but the tunnel's patient dark and the echo of my own pulse. Returning home, I found my mailbox propped open and a neat folded note inside in the same uneven hand. It contained only one line: "You weren't alone." It was not a threat, exactly, more like evidence left at the scene of a small, private crime. I told myself to hand the note to the police. My voice sounded too eager in the quiet station. The officer smiled in the way of those who meet a kind of municipal grief every day. Kids, pranksters, moonlight mischief. He filed nothing, and I left with the note folded in my pocket, heavier than paper should be. Isolation crept in like an accusation. I stopped inviting company, convinced I'd become a curiosity in my own life. Things moved in small ways. A cup shifted on the counter. A photograph angled differently. I set the tape recorder on the kitchen table and left it running overnight, an attempt at proof for both myself and anyone who might not believe the stretching of my edges. The playback revealed hours of ordinary noise cars, a distant dog, until a breath, close and timed where no human had been, threaded through the recording like a second, private voice. Curiosity hardened into compulsion. I began leaving tiny things at the tunnel's mouth during the day: matchbooks, a pebble, a coin, and each morning found one returned, placed differently, sometimes with an added scrap of paper. The handwriting began to echo mine in odd ways. The slant, the way I loop an F when I compared them closely, I felt a vertigo, as if each stroke folded me inward. The town's quiet seemed less like peace, and more like a held breath, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted to give. The louder nights arrived like storms. Footsteps overhead, soft and pacing, kept me awake until dawn, and the recorder caught fragments: the scrape of fabric, a whistle too long to be casual. Then, unmistakably, a whisper threaded through aliens of consonants, a cadence that mimicked my own words. I listened until the edges of my mind frayed, and the repetition began to feel like a coaxing. Come, and nothing more. I understood then that the tunnel's presence had a will that was patient and subtle, preferring small invasions to sudden breaks. The night I decided to confront whatever lived under the tracks. The air was a hard, clear cold that made breath visible. I took the lantern and the map and left the recorder running in my back pocket. Inside the tunnel, the light carved the space into slices. At the far bend, something stirred, not a person in form, but a shadow that slid against the brick in a way that matched my gait. It did not move toward me or away. It mimicked, delayed by the length of a heartbeat. For the first time, I felt observed in a way that made my own movement feel scripted. When I stepped closer, the shadow stilled, and a scrap of paper drifted down from a crevice, landing at my feet. The handwriting on it was not a message, but a single sentence that read like a mirror. I wasn't alone either. The language matched the notes. The loops matched my habitual curl on the G of my name. My chest tightened. The recorder in my pocket ticked like a small, inadequate heart. The place where spectator and scene met was thinner than I had imagined. frayed by a history of gestures, repeated until meaning became worn. I left the tunnel that night not with triumph, but with a heavier doubt. The next morning, I examined the notes I had kept and found, tucked under a page, a line in handwriting that matched my own exactly. I could feel my memories separating, like two tracks running parallel, but not touching. Had I left some of those scraps? Had I been the one returning them in a fugue? The town felt thinner, sound carrying farther, as if every voice had been taught to echo. I realized, with a particular kind of dread, that evidence can be made to look like truth. Choices narrowed to an edge. I could leave, take the train, and fold the town into the past. Or I could stay and attempt a closure I couldn't be certain I deserved. The recorder's last file played back a breath, and then my own voice, distant and layered. I'm here. Behind it, another voice, soft as dust, threaded my words with an answer I could not match. We are always here. I left the file open and drove out of town at dawn, because action felt less like defeat than the idea of living with that answer inside the walls of my life. I stopped to mail back a borrowed thing, a small brass token I'd found among the notes, and placed it without ceremony at the tunnel mouth. The town remained composed in its silence. Weeks later, a neighbor mentioned the mailbox had a new scrap, a line written in a hand that was mine and not mine, saying simply, "Do not go alone." The last image I have before memory blurs is the tunnel, lit by a distant train's passing, the bricks swallowing and returning light like an eye that never quite closes. The question lingered: who watches whom when the watching is ancient and practiced?